Somewhere beneath the polished floors of Monticello, behind a hidden door that tour guides still walk past every single day, there is a room that Thomas Jefferson never wanted the world to find. A room that tells a story, a secret story, the other story of one of America's most celebrated founding fathers. And tonight, we go inside, where we pull back the curtain on the moments that shaped America. Not the sanitized version they taught you in school, the real version. The one written in letters that were never supposed to be found, in rooms that were never supposed to be opened, and in bloodlines that were hidden for over 200 years. Tonight, we're talking about Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States, author of the Declaration of Independence, the man who wrote those immortal words, "All men are created equal." But here is what they didn't tell you. Jefferson owned over 600 enslaved human beings across his lifetime. He fathered at least 6 children with an enslaved woman who had no legal right to say no. He died so deeply in debt that everything at Monticello, every painting, every piece of furniture, every enslaved person was auctioned off within months of his death. And hidden inside Monticello's walls was a secret that his own family fought for 2 centuries to erase. Stay with me, because this story changes everything you thought you knew about Thomas Jefferson. To understand Thomas Jefferson's secrets, you first have to understand the image he worked so hard to create. Jefferson was brilliant, genuinely, extraordinarily brilliant. He spoke 6 languages. He was a self-trained architect, a natural scientist, a philosopher, an inventor, and a musician who played the violin for hours every day. He founded the University of Virginia and designed its rotunda himself. His personal library, over 6,487 books, became the foundation of the United States Library of Congress after the British burned Washington in 1814. He was, by almost any measure, the most intellectually gifted man ever to hold the American presidency. And he knew it. Jefferson was meticulous about his legacy. He kept copies of nearly every letter he ever sent, over 19,000 documents in total. He curated his own story with the care of a man who knew history was watching. But there were things he could not curate, things he could not control, things that would only come to light long after he was gone. Monticello, the plantation Jefferson designed and built on the top of a Virginia mountain, was a marvel of architecture and contradiction. Visitors who came to dine with the great man described his home as magical. Dishes seemed to appear from nowhere. Wine bottles floated up from the basement as if by invisible hands. The house ran like a whisper, efficient, elegant, silent. What Jefferson's guests didn't see was how it ran. Behind every wall, beneath every floor, through a network of underground passages and hidden staircases, over 100 enslaved men, women, and children worked around the clock to create the illusion of effortless refinement. They were invisible by design. Jefferson wanted his guests to feel the luxury without confronting its cost. It was the central deception of his life, and it was built right into the architecture of his home. Now we come to the room. For most of the 20th century, if you visited Monticello on a tour, your guide would point to a small space at the south end of the house and tell you it was a storage room or a weaving room. The details change depending on the decade. What they did not tell you, what the Thomas Jefferson Foundation itself refused to officially acknowledge until 2017, was that this room had been the private quarters of Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman, and by all historical evidence, Thomas Jefferson's partner for nearly 4 decades. Who was Sally Hemings? She was born in 1773. Her mother, Elizabeth Hemings, was herself the daughter of an English sea captain and an enslaved African woman. Sally's father is believed to have been John Wales, Jefferson's own father-in-law, which meant Sally Hemings was the half-sister of Jefferson's wife, Martha. Let that land. Sally came to Monticello as a child. When Jefferson's wife Martha died in 1782, Jefferson was devastated. He promised her on her deathbed that he would never remarry. He kept that promise. But 2 years later, Jefferson traveled to Paris as the American minister to France. He brought Sally with him. She was 14 years old. Jefferson was 41. What happened in Paris is something historians have debated for over 2 centuries. What we know is this: Sally Hemings arrived in Paris as an enslaved girl. Under French law, she was free. She could have walked out of Jefferson's household and never looked back. She chose not to, or was coerced not to. The historical record is silent on the precise nature of that choice. What the record is clear on is what happened when she returned to Virginia with Jefferson in 1789. Sally Hemings was pregnant. She was 16 years old. Over the next 22 years, Sally Hemings gave birth to at least 6 children. 4 survived to adulthood. DNA testing conducted in 1998 confirmed what historians had long suspected. At least one of her children, Eston Hemings, was directly related to the Jefferson male line. The room where Sally Hemings lived at Monticello was just steps from Jefferson's private bedroom, accessible through a narrow passageway hidden behind a wall. It measured roughly 14.5 feet by 13 feet. She lived in that room for 38 years. Today, if you visit Monticello, you can walk through that room. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation has restored it as best they can from historical records. They've placed a small bed, a window, a fireplace, and a plaque that finally, after 2 centuries of silence, tells Sally Hemings' story. It took 200 years, but history, it seems, does not stay hidden forever. The Sally Hemings story is the most dramatic of Jefferson's secrets, but it's not the only one. Jefferson had a secret that even his closest allies didn't fully understand. He was chronically, catastrophically in debt. At the time of his death in 1826, Jefferson owed the equivalent of over $2 million in today's money. His debts had been accumulating for decades. Bad harvests, failed investments, and a standard of living that outpaced even his considerable income. He never told the public. He never told Congress. He maintained the image of the prosperous philosopher-farmer until the very end. There was also Jefferson's secret Bible. Jefferson was publicly a Christian. At least, he needed to appear to be. But privately, he believed that organized religion was, in his own words, a system of deception devised by priests. He spent several years cutting up and rearranging the New Testament with a razor blade and glue, removing all references to miracles, resurrection, and divinity. What remained, a slim pamphlet he called The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, was a purely philosophical text. He never published it. He never showed it to anyone. It was found hidden among his papers after his death. And then there was Jefferson's personal spy network. During his presidency, Jefferson ran an unofficial intelligence operation through the post office, reading and copying the mail of political opponents. He used private couriers. He communicated in codes. He tracked his enemies' movements through informants in every major American city. The man who wrote the Bill of Rights personally authorized the surveillance of American citizens. The contradiction, as always with Jefferson, is staggering. And this is what makes Thomas Jefferson so endlessly, painfully fascinating. He wrote, "All men are created equal." He wrote, "Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." He wrote some of the most powerful words in defense of human freedom that any human being has ever committed to paper. And he enslaved 607 people over the course of his lifetime. Jefferson himself knew this was wrong. He wrote privately about slavery as a moral and political depravity. He called it a fire bell in the night, a catastrophe he could see coming, but felt powerless to stop. In his original draft of the Declaration of Independence, he included a passionate condemnation of the slave trade, and it was removed by the Continental Congress before the document was signed. But here is the question that no historian has ever fully answered. Why didn't he act? Jefferson had the power, he had the platform, he had the moral vocabulary. He was, at various points, a state legislator, a governor, a secretary of state, a vice president, and a two-term president. If any man in American history had both the ability and the intellectual framework to challenge slavery, it was Thomas Jefferson. He didn't. The most honest answer historians have come to, and it's an uncomfortable one, is that Jefferson valued his lifestyle more than his principles. Monticello required enslaved labor to function. His debts required the labor and the collateral value of enslaved people to sustain. Without the men and women he owned, Jefferson's carefully constructed world would have collapsed. He chose the world. In his will, Jefferson freed only 5 enslaved people, all of them members of the Hemings family. The remaining 130 enslaved men, women, and children at Monticello were sold at public auction within 2 years of his death to pay his debts. Among those sold were some of Sally Hemings' own grandchildren. This is the secret life of Thomas Jefferson, not a conspiracy, not a rumor, a documented, verifiable, deeply human story of a man brilliant enough to imagine a perfect world, and too flawed, too comfortable, too human to actually build it. In November of 1998, the journal Nature published a bombshell study. DNA testing had been conducted on male line descendants of Field Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's paternal uncle, and compared to the DNA of male descendants of Eston Hemings, Sally's youngest son. The match was confirmed. The Jefferson family had spent 175 years insisting the paternity claims were lies, invented by a political enemy named James Callender. After 1998, that argument became scientifically untenable. Today, the Monticello Association, the organization of Jefferson's white descendants, still debates whether to officially welcome the Hemings descendants into their family reunions held at Monticello each year. The debate continues. The wounds are still open. But Sally Hemings' descendants have their own reunion now. They gather at Monticello too, at the house where their ancestor lived in a 14-foot room for 38 years. They stand in that room. They read her name on the plaque on the wall. And history, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, begins to tell the whole truth. Thomas Jefferson is not a simple villain. He is not a simple hero. He is something far more difficult. A mirror. A mirror that reflects back every contradiction America has ever tried to look away from. The secrets of Monticello are not ancient history. They are the foundation of the country that exists today. And we cannot understand where we are going until we are honest about where we have been. If this story moved you, if it made you see something differently, subscribe to Mr. History, hit the notification bell, and leave me a comment. Do you think Jefferson's legacy should be preserved, reformed, or reconsidered entirely? I read every comment, and the debate in the comments section is always the best part. This is Mr. History. The past is never as simple as they told you. See you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe now for more